Hey there, I'm Jerry Scullion, founder of the Human Centered Design Network, and welcome back to the channel where we explore stories of innovation, transformation, and creating impact. Today I'm excited to have my good friend Charles Street with me. We'll be diving into his journey of leading digital transformation at a major bank in Australia. Plus, we'll explore his incredible project Inkwazi, which combines adventure with making a difference in South Africa. Now, I know that many of us listening are interested in doing more meaningful work, but are really caught between the tension of working and earning money and putting food on the table for our families, and may not have an easy outlet for this type of work. But if so, if this is you, then listen on, this episode is just for you. But before we jump in, I want to give a huge shout out to my long-term friends and sponsor of this episode, Smaply. Now, if you're working on customer journey mapping, which I believe is one of the best first steps you can take in leading your organization towards a more human-centered outcome, Smaply is the ultimate tool for creating and managing your journey maps. It's a one-stop solution where you can build world-class journey maps, manage them from one central place, and collaborate them with your team in real time. Whether you're working on customer personas or mapping out complex journeys, Smaply has the tools you need to get it done. Why do I say this? Because I do it, and this is my tool of choice, and it has been for over a decade. So if you're in the game of human-centered design, be sure to check Smaply out, okay? Just do a Google for Smaply and you'll find it. Now, let's get back to today's conversation. We'll hear how Charles navigated the challenges of registering, should I say, this project, getting it set up, Inkwazi as it's called, and the incredible impact that it's making in South African communities. About the project, Inkwazi is set up to provide bicycles to children in need of empowering them through education. And what that means is they saw through research that truancy played a big role for children in rural areas, and they were able to reduce the truancy rates and increase the success, the outcome factor that we're always talking on this podcast of children completing school through giving them a bike. We've bought 2 bikes on this podcast because we really love this initiative, and you'll hear more about this over the coming weeks. You don't want to miss this episode. It's a fantastic one. So let's hit the subscribe button and let's get started. Let's talk about what you're working on, Inkwazi Adventures, okay? But before we get to that, the reason why I'm really interested in this, Charles, is because you're working full time. Okay, you're working like 9 to 5 and you're doing this in the evenings. Yeah. And the bit that really kind of fascinates me, and I refer to you as a change maker on this podcast specifically, is that people say, well, in my job, I can't really do anything. I can't really improve situations for people. But you're proving that that's not the case. You can actually do an awful lot of good for the world by taking on these projects. So before we get to that, I want to know a little bit more around what you do, because we have worked together, disclaimer folks, way back in, I'm going to say 2014. I think it was around that time. So 10 years ago in Australia. Charles was in charge of coffee and tea on the team. He used to go and get
lost biscuits.
He was not. You were a senior to me, I think. But definitely we had a lot of fun working together. So maybe tell us how you describe what you do currently at the moment. What's your background as well, Charles?
I guess I've always been around transformation, strategy, digital innovation. We worked together at CBA on a big digital transformation project. I think the way I describe it is to kind of try and help lead organizations through big changes. But in particular, kind of, strategic, unknown grey space, where, it's a little bit of unknown, try and define it as you go. Lots of uncomfortable for many in the organization. And you need this kind of handful of people, like when we were working together, of people a little bit courageous, a little bit,
that's crazy.
Optimistic of what's possible. And then you need that little bit of kind of belief that, this can be done. So at the moment I lead a very similar project at at a bank in Australia or Bank West. So we're transforming from a traditional bank into a digital-only bank.
That's part of the Westpac group, isn't it?
It's part of CBA Group.
Part of the CBA group, okay.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting time because we're going from traditional regional bank into becoming a leading Australian digital bank.
Nice.
And yeah, so with that, it's a lot of internal change management. Changing culture, mindset, ways of working, but also externally customers, the way they interact with the bank and stuff will change. But really interesting. It's all new technologies, new innovations. So I enjoy that kind of space. A bit of organized chaos, I think.
Now, for anyone listening, people might say, it's a really unusual Australian accent that Charles has. And you're right, it is an unusual accent because it's not an Australian accent at all. Whereabouts in South Africa are you from originally?
Yeah, so originally from Johannesburg.
Okay.
That's where I kind of grew up. And yeah, lived there probably about half of my life. But have been in Australia and back to South Africa a few times. I guess I've always had this soft spot there. And so I did high school, uni in Perth, Western Australia. Then I went back to play some rugby.
Yeah.
Did a bit more study. Met my wife there, stayed a bit longer.
I won't mention the rugby to you, Charles.
Yeah. We can talk a bit about that as well if you
like.
like.
Yeah, like I'm looking out here at the Aviva Stadium in the distance. But for anyone who's not into rugby, Ireland and South Africa have a good rivalry over the last couple of years.
And the Irish have been doing really well. But
yeah, I think we won the last test. So we'll just leave that with us here. The only reason I brought you on the podcast to get one up on you, because for years you were always like, you're nothing. And I was like, yeah, we're going to be something. But I want to take you back to your time in South Africa. So would you have been alive at the time of Mandela, coming out of prison and, I
grew up during that kind of apartheid time, but then when my parents moved to Australia, it was just before the shift in government over from, Mandela coming out and change of government and stuff. And then when I went back to South Africa after uni, lived there for about 5-6 years. So that was quite an interesting contrast to see kind of, growing up there, then being away and coming back and living there.
What was it like though, Charles? I know for many here, we've read, Mandela, and a lot of us are aware of what it was like. But what was it like with that transformation? Obviously, it's an incredible story. But for you personally, what were the changes that you saw?
I think it was interesting because I think I was probably lucky in a way. I think the home I grew up with, my parents' stuff, I don't think that there was ever any of that apartheid kind of thing. So I used to play with black friends, and would be and so I never really, as a child, got the whole thing about
what was going on?
That divide or things that they certain people can and can't do. I think what's really interesting, and this is probably relatable to any big organization, if you think about a country going through transformation, was this way in which I guess Mandela and everyone transitioned the country in a peaceful way as much as possible.
Yeah.
By just a massive amount of suddenly overnight got this change in government, change in way people have never had opportunities suddenly to have. But I think what it also showed was how it takes generations to kind of work it through, because and this is part of the Inkwazi kind of stuff, is education is one of the biggest things, right? And so when people have been not had access to that, then it puts them way behind, and so it takes a long time to catch up. So I think that's been one of the biggest transformations, I guess, is like access to education and stuff so that you can have this generation
Absolutely.
coming through, and that's, yeah.
So we hear that time and time again, like education is one of the key things to increase the success of any transformation. You've lived through a transformational time, either being there within the society of South Africa or from Australia's perspective looking onwards. And it's similar to me as well. Like I grew up in an era of violence, and then
Yeah.
we went through that transition and the Good Friday Agreement, and the guns are down, and we're not living in total harmony. There's still subgroups there, but for the most part, we're at one. Talk to me about what the possibility of the possible, because when you're working in South Africa and you're from South Africa, there's obviously a deep connection to you and the community that you're working with now at the moment in Inkwazi. I want to talk to you about where it came from, because it's not something that you would take quite lightly and just saying, well, I might start doing that. It's a lot of work in what you're trying to do at the moment. So talk to us about the inception of Inkwazi.
Yeah, so inception is really about 4 or 5 years ago. I guess had this idea of how do you bring together the passion for, I guess, the country. I mean, South Africa is one of the most beautiful countries in the world. It's got a unique wilderness of animals and wildlife and outdoors and stuff that's very unique.
Yeah.
The sense of outdoor adventure. So I think it's always, life is an adventure. Going outside and outdoor adventures is a big passion. And then this whole thing about making a difference. So it doesn't matter who you are, where you are in the world, or how much money you have, you can make a difference. And so got together with two really good close friends of mine, Cornell and his wife Annika. I pretty much grew up with Cornell as a brother, and we said, well, sorry,
at the Braai.
Yeah, at the Braai, playing rugby, cricket. And basically it was this concept of how do you bring together this kind of making a difference through adventure, but taking people to this unique country and seeing stuff. And so we often talk about this concept of reset, reflect, and reconnect. So the reset is almost, and I think that the penny dropped when my kids were about 3 or 4, and we went to like in Sydney, Westfield, and my daughter said to me, as we walked in, are we going to get sushi and a baby tuna? And I was like, I didn't even know what sushi was until I was like in uni. So, the world they're growing up is just so different. So it's almost like this concept of how can we take people out of this country where you've got everything going for you, and have a bit of a reset moment, get out of your comfort zone, create that space and time to be able to reflect on your life versus someone else, and then hopefully at the end of this adventure you're kind of when you come back home you're reconnecting, but this time with what's important in life, right? And so that difference between a person in Sydney can sit and complain and the whole morning can be ruined because the train was 5 minutes late, versus a kid in South Africa who needs to walk 10 kilometers to get to school, and they're the happiest, right? And so you kind of just this perception of what's really important, or how to be resourceful, make a plan.
So can I ask you a little bit more around the mechanics of Inkwazi? Okay, because I'm going through the process at the moment of trying to register something similar to this, but it's not in South Africa. It's more within Ireland. Going together with the two other people, you had to register this, correct? This is an entity that was registered. So is it registered as a not-for-profit, or is it charity? Like that whole status thing is something that we're facing at the moment. How did you get around that? What was your situation?
Yeah, at the beginning, I spent quite a bit of time trying to wrestle with this. Do I
Yeah,
register as a charity or business? And we went with so it's an Australian registered business,
yeah,
because I'm based in Australia. But and the reason for that is because we want to take people on the tour on these adventures with us, and they pay to come with us, and that's
oh,
mostly
yeah,
cover the cost of the 10-day. It's about a 10-day all inclusive adventure. So we cover, you pay
nice.
one price, you get everything covered. Once you arrive in South Africa, we take care of everything.
Yeah,
But the way in which to get around the charity bit was, we partnered with an organization called, Elephants, Rhinos, People, so ERP,
yeah.
and they're a registered charity, a
Okay.
non-profit. And so all the money we fundraise for these bicycles, that we purchase, 100% of that money goes towards ERP,
ERP.
and
Yeah,
that's the non-profit side. So, with the way we set up the business is all the fundraising money goes into completely separate accounts.
yeah,
It's all 100% goes towards the bicycles. And it's
yeah.
only when the people come with us on the trip and pay for their
It's a separate business
trip,
account.
that's separate. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to us because for anyone watching and listening, Charles messaged me on LinkedIn, and we hadn't heard from each other in a few years. Like I've been messaging him throughout the years, but he just didn't respond. And only joking, of course. Um, Charles said, "Look, I'm working on this great idea," and I had seen it. I think he'd mentioned it a few times on LinkedIn, and I was like, "Oh, fair play, Charles. I always knew you were a good guy, and I'm not just saying that on the podcast." Um, and you were like, "Hey, look, would you be interested in sponsoring?" And I am going to sponsor. I'm going to do it after this here. Today, I'm going to buy a bike, and for anyone listening, I'll put a link into the show notes. If you want to purchase a bike and help a child get to school, which we're going to learn a little bit more around the context of that, you can do so by just clicking on the link below. So, talk to us about the problem and how it was uncovered, about getting people to school on time and the truancy rates and so forth.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. So, in the really remote towns in South Africa, very different to here in Australia, where, um, I think people just assume kids go to their local school, it's around the corner.
Mm,
You either get dropped off with mum and dad, or you get on a bus, or you know, ride your bike if you're close enough.
yeah,
But in these remote communities, some of these kids walk up to 20 kilometers a day just to get to school and back.
yeah,
And they, obviously poor communities, and quite remote. And so these kids often drop out of school because they get too exhausted. It's
yeah.
too hard, to go for 12 years walking 20 kilometers a day. Is a long thing. And that's,
Absolutely.
during summer, winter, rain,
Heat as well.
thunderstorms. And so when ERP started this bicycle, they call it Bikes for ERP.
Yeah,
Um, they saw a massive uplift in academic, uh, rates. So basically, one school, as an example, I think their matriculation rate was about 35%. So,
yeah.
3, 4 kids out of 10 would finish school. As soon as they got bicycles, about 9 out of 10 finished school. So massive uplift, right?
Wow.
And energizes the community. It gets, and the biggest impact is really, these kids are now finishing school. They can go to university. They can get a proper job, and
Mm,
then they're empowered and set up for life, right? So this
wow.
is massive positive cycle, into, and yeah, so that's proven to really work. Some of these kids hand down their bicycles when they finish school to younger kids because they've seen the impact this has had on them.
Sure.
Um, and again, like, when I contrast the experience in Australia, kids take it for granted. You get a bicycle when you're a certain age, you get a new one. You look at the Verge collections and you see all these bicycles standing up there, right? But for these kids, it's the first time they ever received a bicycle. And some of them only learn to ride on the day they get these new bicycles. And that's
Yeah.
probably part of the best experience on the day when we hand out these bicycles is that you actually spend time helping these kids learn how to write. And again, just looking at their determination, they don't, complain or anything. They're not scared. For them, it's almost like if I don't learn to ride this bicycle, I can't take it home, right? And so in a matter of an hour or 2 hours, they've learned how to ride a bicycle first time.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. So the insight that came for, I guess, one part of Inkwazi, was that something that you uncovered, or was it through Annika? I can't remember the name of the other person that you mentioned.
Yeah. So when we started Inkwazi, we said what's something we can do or someone we can partner with who.
Yeah.
And we want to make a real difference, not just a kind of handout of money or like a meal or something. We want to make a real impact. The organization that Cornell Annika works for, it's pretty amazing. The ERP is part of that organization, so they've got a commercial side and then there's not-for-profit side.
Yeah.
And so they pretty much 1% of their profits goes towards these charities, and so it's a really good organization the way they're set up. And so through them, we got introduced to Nikolai, who kind of started and founded this whole Bikes with ERP. And like you'll know as well, like in any partnership, you want to make sure there's mutual common vision and goals and stuff. And we just immediately knew, like, what they were doing and what they were looking for and what we were doing just kind of matched up really well. And,
so how do you handle, like, so when people donate, which I'm going to be donating on behalf of the Human Centered Design Network, how do you close the cycle? Because people who donate, say, I think it's €400 for one bike, isn't that correct? Or $400?
It's about 400 Australian dollars. So what's that in euros?
That's about $50 to, only joking. I'm
that's right.
Making a joke at how weak the Australian dollar is at the moment. So whenever someone donates the 400 Australian dollars, one of the pieces that, when I've worked with not-for-profits before, is closing that loop to make sure that the person who's donated feels that they've actually succeeded, the money's gone to that place. Is there any sort of stories or anecdotes that you can maybe share about closing that loop between the donator?
Definitely. So when people donate via our fundraising page, they become part of our Inkwazi community. And so part of that we share leading up to what we call the bicycle drop. We share a couple of videos, insights as we prepare.
Nice.
When the bicycles get bought, they delivered in boxes. We share some videos.
An email update.
And then the weekend that we do the drop, we do these kind of Facebook Live posts. And so people can follow and watch those along the way. And then after the bicycle drop, we usually do one of two things. So if you've donated like a whole bicycle, then you get your own personal photograph of the little boy or girl that got the bicycle. And so
I could get my photograph on a bike. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, you get a photograph of the little boy or girl that rides.
You get a photograph of the person.
Yeah. Which, it's a really nice thing to see the kind of smile on their faces when they receive their first bicycle. And then we usually make a bit of a video of the weekend, like a 3 to 5 minute video, which we share, and people can actually see it all, where their money has gone, which is really good. And then obviously people who come with us on the adventure, if they've also fundraised and donated money, then they will physically be part of handing out those kind of bicycles, which is pretty cool.
So on the website here, when I'm looking at it, saying our adventures, so people wanting to go to Hambo, is that right?
Yeah, Hambo, yeah.
What's the angle with that? Like, if you're taking people from, say, Australia over to South Africa, what's the outcome that you're open to drive by bringing people from Australia over to South Africa, other than the fact that they're going to gain more context and situational awareness of the problems? Is there anything other than that? Is there a business objective in terms of like profit that can actually go back into the business to help more people get to school on time?
Yeah, so we have people who've joined us from all over the world. This year we've got someone coming to us from UK as well, actually.
Well, I'm in Ireland,
Which is
so I'm not part of the UK. Just to
yeah, yeah. um,
this
and
part of the world.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, no. So basically, that 10-day adventure is really that kind of reset, reflect, reconnect kind of
Yeah,
opportunity. But from I guess, a business point of view, like I mentioned at the start, this is a kind of a side passion
thing.
that I'm working
Absolutely.
on.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, yeah, we're not trying to make massive amount of money. We're just trying to make sure we can keep this up and running.
The
Um,
operation costs.
yeah, and hopefully get to a point where maybe we can do 2 adventures a year,
Okay,
and kind of build it from there. And yeah, maybe one day when I can slow down in the kind of corporate world, I can maybe do this a bit more often. And
absolutely.
as long as it's what we're really trying to do is just make sure it's self-sustaining. And so,
Yeah, absolutely. But what does Inkwazi mean, just as a curiosity?
yeah, so Inkwazi is like a fish eagle in South Africa. And so that's the Zulu name for it. And yeah, again, eel has been one of my favorite animals always. And so there's a bit of a play on that. But also, I think, being a strategist, kind of like the concept of, eagles fly really high, but they can pinpoint something down
Yeah,
below and really go for that. So,
I get that. I get that. So the goal at the moment, I think I saw earlier on, is 24,000 Australian dollars. Is it you're trying to raise?
yeah, that'll get us to 60 bicycles.
Yeah,
And the reason for 60 is we've delivered about 143 bicycles to date over the last 3 to 4 years. And
yeah,
so that'll get us to the number 200 bicycle, which will
that'd be
be quite
amazing.
a nice story to tell. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of like the bit that comes after when you give them the bicycle, is there an educational piece there that how they can change their tires and how they maintain the bikes and so forth? Because I know from I've got 2 young kids now, when they got their bikes, they're like, "Dad, tire's flat," and I'm like, "Oh, here you go. Here's another task." And I'm trying to teach them like
Yeah.
this is how you put the thing into the tire, and then you pump it. They still can't get it. And I'm sure it's not too dissimilar out in South Africa when, their bike tire is flat as a puncture. What's the system around that, the maintenance piece around that? Is
Yeah,
there
it's a
anything that
really
can be done around
good
that?
question. So, as part of the charity that the bikes will be, part of the money goes towards employing a local mechanic in the
Ah,
community.
very good.
And so he or she is provided with all the tools and the things, and they get trained up on how to maintain and fix these bicycles. And
Yeah,
so the
great.
kids can go to that person anytime, doesn't cost them any money, because the main thing is to make sure the bicycles stay up. The children also obviously learn some basic maintenance, because when they're riding quite far distances,
Yeah,
so they get a small toolkit that they can use themselves.
yeah,
And then we usually fit the wheels with what they call perma tubes, which I discovered you can't find in Australia anywhere. I'm struggling to find them for my own kids because I'm getting tired of like fixing punches. Um, but these are like solid fill. They're soft, but they fill tubes that you
yeah.
put inside the tires, and so they can pretty much ride over anything, and they won't get a puncture or flat
You
tire.
get on some road and some cars as well. They've got the technology that means that it doesn't go flat flat
Yeah,
in the local
so
cars.
that definitely makes a big difference. Makes the bikes a little bit heavier, but definitely helps.
More robust.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great example, Charles, of, for people out there who are listening who they might be in an opportunity or in a role, should I say, where there's very little opportunity to apply some of their human centeredness to the world. And you're a great example of, doing these things. And I vaguely remember you talking about something similar to this one day over coffee 10 years ago. So I'll put a link to the donate so people can donate to Inkwazi, but also if they want to buy a bike, or maybe there's a group of you that want to club together and buy a bike and follow along on the journey. It's a fantastic one. I'm going to see how I can actually collaborate with you a little bit more and trying to push this, because I think 60 bikes is totally doable. Especially if there's anyone here from a corporate who's listening to the podcast and wants to reach out to Charles directly. I'll put a link to Charles' email in there as well, because corporates definitely have budgets every year to sponsor, and it would be a really nice thing for brands to get involved with this. Especially, I think you mentioned that they can actually put a little bit of a logo on the bike as well. Is that right?
Yeah, we do lots of exciting things. So we've had a couple of businesses and a couple of schools also who get involved, who'd love to use that as an opportunity to tell their kids about difference in schools and stuff. And so we usually get the logos, from these organizations. And then when we build the bicycles and set them all up, we put the little stickers on the bicycles. And so it's almost like the Formula One concept, right? So this bike has been sponsored by all these schools or businesses. And it's just a nice way for the kids also who get the bicycle to understand that, these organizations and schools and people have all donated to give them a bicycle. It's not just a handout, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great for them to feel connected as well, saying, well, look, all of these people are actually here, they're on our side, and they want us to succeed, as opposed to that whole kind of singular perspective of like it's us and them against the world. The people here, especially people listening to this podcast in particular, really want to get the best possible outcomes to try and help more of an equitable world. This is a really fantastic one, and I totally, if I had a hat on me here, I'd tip my hat to you on that, Charles. I'd love to hear how you get on. When are you going to be aiming to deliver these bikes?
Yeah, so we're going in October. We're
not too far away.
Leaving in about 5 or 6 weeks.
Okay.
So I'll definitely be in touch, and I'll let you know how it goes. I'll be sharing some photos and videos. Because after the bicycles, we go off in the bush for about 5 days and do your whole hiking safari. And so it takes about 2 weeks before we come back.
Living the dream. Look, Charles, great to catch up with you, and I'll update everyone when we hear more about it, but I'm going to be sponsoring or at least one of those bikes anyway, so you've got 59 to aim for now.
Yeah. No, excellent. Thanks, Jaron. It's always really great to catch up, and I've been following your podcast, so it seems like you're doing some good work for a change.
Good man, Charles. I'll chat to you soon. Cheers, mate.
Thank you.